Okay, welcome to Hull Noir in Conversation. I'm Nick Triplow, one of the co-founders of Hull Noir, along with Nick Quantrill and Nikki East. And we're here to launch Tina Jackson's brilliant novel, The Beloved Children, which is published by Fahrenheit Press. So this is an in conversation and a launch event all rolled into one. Just a very quick word about the book. It's set in the closing months of World War II and a rundown provincial theatre laced with mysticism and fortune tellers and the story of three chorus girls. It's funny, it's wise, it's smart, it's soulful, it's everything you'd want from a read. And it's a book that once you get into, you don't want to leave this world. So first of all, congratulations on publication day. And can I just sort of ask by saying, can you tell us a bit about the story, a bit about its origins and how these characters came together?
The story, or the first story, because there's many stories woven into this book like a Russian doll, but the origin story of it came with a dance that years ago I put together for a troupe I am part of called Dancers Bizarre. And I had an old Pelham puppet who was a dancer, and I had a similar costume to hers, and I manipulated this puppet, and out came all these characters from the toy box. And very strangely, once these characters had emerged, they wouldn't go back in the toy box, and they were some of the characters who fed into The Beloved Children. So that's how they started. They did come out of show, My Life in Show, and they set up a train of thought where who are these characters? What are their stories? They're characters that very often exist in the sidelines of other stories. They get added as tinges of otherness or exoticism. And I thought these characters would like their stories to be at the heart of the tale, rather than as decorative touches in somebody else's book.
And did they come fully formed? It sounds as if they did almost sort of not write themselves, but they kind of, you knew them to a certain extent.
I do know them. They are characters that they're not any one person, but they're characters that I know, that I understand. They did come very fully formed. There's a section in the book where the beloved Graces go up to wardrobe and meet for the first time Janna and Dolores, who are very significant characters in the book. And I started writing that, and I thought it was going to be a short story, and 3,000 words of that scene just wrote themselves.
Yeah.
And then the stories just kept on growing around them. So yeah, they came. And that section is still in the book pretty much as it was when I wrote it in the early hours of the morning on a chilly morning, sitting there going, who are these? What are you doing?
And they just came.
They came.
One of the things the novel does really well is it creates that unity between stuff that's incredibly real and vividly imagined down to every chip in every teacup, with a kind of magical, mystical world that's partly created by theatre and by being backstage, but is partly these characters and their lived experience. And Janna has this phrase that she repeats: "It was and it was not." Was that idea of something that, I don't know, I'm hesitating to call it magical realism because it's a kind of catch-all term that doesn't really mean anything, but was that part of your thinking from the beginning, that it was and it was not?
Yes, it was absolutely key, because that's to do with show, with theatre, with illusions, with the stories that we tell, and stories always transform in the telling. There is a core of something very clear and truthful at the heart of most stories, but all stories get transformed, all stories shift and change to be appropriate for the teller as they're telling them, or for the person hearing the story as they're receiving that story. So stories aren't set in stone. One of the things that show is all about is illusion, and yet there's something, you know, the illusion is real. You are creating something that exists, and yet you know there's a tension between what you see and what you perceive and what may be actually going on, and that's, you know, that extends to people's, you know, the events in people's lives. What you see, you don't ever see all of it. What's going on, you can never completely know.
And that's important, that that's woven in throughout, isn't it?
It is. It's up to the reader to come to the conclusions that, you know, there are clues dropped in all the way through as to what's going on, but, you know, people can pick them up and do with them as they will.
They do, and I think that's one of those things where I've read it a couple of times, and certainly the second time round, it let more go than it did the first time, and it's a beautifully layered piece of writing.
Thank you.
In the Observer review, Ben East praised the novel for atmospheric storytelling and joyful language, both of which I think are true. It is lyrical, and it is colourful and funny and moving, but it's also downright filthy in places. And I was just wondering, were there times you had to rein yourself in, or did you allow it to go as dark and as grubby as you wanted?
Well, it wouldn't be any fun if it weren't, you know, the light and shade, light and shade. If it were just one thing, it would be boring, you know, in the end, you know. But the darkness, you know, you've got moments of light, but there are also, you know, necessary times of darkness, and there are, you know, some dreadful things going on in this book, and it's all part of a tapestry of, you know, yeah, light and shade, and sometimes that was massively fun to write, and sometimes it required other things. You know, the darkest parts weren't the hardest parts to write.
They weren't.
No,
Right.
no, they, you know, and some of them were necessary things that happened. You know, they had to happen, and, you know, as a writer, writing those noir bits were great. It was, you know, some of it was hard. There were some hard things in it to write. There are some difficult things going on in here, and I had to think about, you know, I don't want to give too much away about
No, obviously.
themes in the book, because hopefully people will read them. But there's some shocking things that happen, and that's a reflection of what happens. You know, lives can be very shocking, and lives of people that are not always seen. Things go on. You know, I realise writing, you know, I'm absolutely fortunate to have been picked up by a brilliant crime imprint. But for a long time, I didn't think I was writing a crime novel, because my interests are not so much in investigation as in concealment.
Yeah.
And there are things concealed in these characters' lives. It's all about secrets and concealment, and necessarily they're dark.
But I mean, that places it very much in a noir tradition, doesn't it?
Bad things happening to bad people.
Yeah.
Yes. And you know, sometimes there's another sort of idea that I really like, which is that it's, you know, it's not just bad people who do bad things.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people commit crime as a result of circumstance, or, you know, and they become criminal, or they become criminalized because of an event that happens, a twist in life that goes wrong, or simply sometimes because of the way that they live their lives, that, you know, that other people deem, you know, unacceptable, and show people are amongst the many people whose lives do get criminalized,
Yeah.
just by virtue of them being there.
And there is this notion, you wrote a piece a week or so ago, or maybe it was earlier this week, about the 1932 film, is it The Freaks?
Freaks, Todd Browning's film,
Can you
Freaks.
tell us a bit about that? Because that's fascinating. I haven't seen the film, but it sounds like an amazing film.
Freaks is an astonishing film. Todd Browning, who's most famous for making Dracula, made Freaks, and Todd Browning's past was in circus and sideshows and vaudeville, and he knew all the characters, all the people who appear in this film, which is, you know, it's a very lurid and melodramatic story. It's a revenge story. Somebody does the one character who is physically, you know, not a freak, is the dark-hearted character in the story, and she commits terrible wrong against one of the characters, and it's a revenge story. And the film has been regarded as very controversial because of its portrayal of sideshow freaks, and it's quite startling, if you're not familiar with that world, to see these people who would normally have been shown in a sideshow. You know, it would have been quite secretive, and there'd have been a thrill about going up to the, you know, this very carny kind of ambience, and roll up, and, you know, before your very eyes, and you'd go into a tent, and it would be seen in that kind of almost clandestine way. I mean, there these people were on the screen, and people who may not have seen them before were like, oh my gosh. And yet the wonderful thing about this film is that even if your first response is to go, oh my gosh, this is a world a world of people I have not encountered, because Todd Browning knows them, they're humanized immediately, and you stop seeing their appearance and you see them, their lives, their concerns, your sympathies by the end of the film are completely as they should be with the person or the people whose lives have been messed up.
And I mean, that's something that The Beloved Children does wonderfully well. Is it takes these characters who, to begin with, you kind of not quite sure, and when you're drawn into a novel and you're not sure about the characters who are sort of leading you, it doesn't take long before your sympathies are entirely with them. In many ways, it's kind of lyricism and its color and its edginess are redolent of perhaps some of Angela Carter's writing.
I love Angela Carter's writing.
Perhaps Hilary Mantel's Beyond Black.
I love that book.
Are there other books that you kind of look at and think that there are certain influences there, perhaps?
Little Geek Love is another one that was really influential. A theatre company, Knee High Theatre, were vastly influential as well in their portrayal of, you know, the everyday kind of magic and the way things can transform theatrically. Tom Waits, lots of Tom Waits going, you know, especially the Black Rider going on in there. There's a whole slew of stuff that's fed into it.
I mean, it's a really musical novel. in so many ways it demands a soundtrack. Did you have a listening sound or writing soundtrack?
I've got a soundtrack for it on Spotify, and there is a shorter version of the soundtrack doing the rounds because Standard Issue asked for a playlist for the book. But yeah, there's all kinds of lovely old music hall songs and swing tunes, and what else have I got? Bits of old music hall, as I said, crackly old 1930s songs, Al Bowley, Flanagan and Allen. And then there's much more kind of up-to-date takes on Carney music and Romany gypsy music, from, classical Russian romantic Romany music from the likes of the Kolpakov trio, and to much more kind of twisted takes on it by Nick Cave and Calexico, all sorts of things. If you want this soundtrack, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely link up to that. It sounds right up my street.
You'd love it. It would be right up your street.
This is your first novel with Fahrenheit Press, and you've spoken about as a place where the outsiders can gather. Can you tell us a bit about how you found each other?
Fahrenheit Press, I was really fortunate to discover Fahrenheit Press through Writing Magazine. And full disclosure here, I work for Writing Magazine, and we ran an interview with the publisher of Fahrenheit Press, Chris McVeigh, and it was a fantastic interview. He's witty, articulate, bolshy, partisan, brilliant. It's like being signed to 4AD or Mute Records, and I didn't think I'd written a crime novel, but I was so impressed with this publishing company and their ethos of just publishing takes on crime fiction that was so interesting and individual and colourful and human and humane and just brilliant. Everything from ghost dogs to, regenerating Hull to, the rave scene in Manchester. They've got, just brilliant writers and brilliant takes on noir fiction, and some of it's funny and some of it's heartbreaking, and all of it that I've read so far is wonderful. So off I sent it, and I thought, well, it's not a typical crime novel, but it's not really a typical anything. And I was overjoyed to be accepted into this band of, daring, brave, brilliant writers, with this publisher who just is so behind his writers. And I couldn't have found a better publishing house. I'd always rather have been with, Serpent's Tail as it was in the 1980s than a major label.
And I mean, you've revisited the characters from The Beloved Children in a short story, which, you've got it there. I'm not going to read it out just in case it upsets anybody, which it didn't.
I felt as if I'd won a medal when somebody got in touch with Fahrenheit Press, of all publishers. They got in touch with Fahrenheit Press to complain about the title of their latest fanzine. And I thought, I've arrived.
I mean, but what I would say is the short story is almost a prequel to The Beloved Children. In many ways, it kind of creates that world or recreates that world only a few years previously. I have a sense that these characters have more to say, and I just wondered whether or not they're still talking.
Well, they might do. you know, they've got mileage in them still. I'm writing something at the moment which has put a cameo of them in, oh, certainly of Janna and Dolores. They've appeared in a cameo. They may come back. They, you know, they'll let me know if there's any more stories that need to be told. Hope so.
So in the meantime, congratulations on the publication of The Beloved Children. It's published by Fahrenheit Press, and it's available in all the kinds of places that you would expect it to be. And it's without doubt an incredibly warm, funny, brilliant, serious noir circus show read. It's an amazing book. So congratulations. Thank you for joining us today, and good luck with the book.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's been a total pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.